Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. You're not supposed to eat before you present because then you're going to do this, but I couldn't not have that cobbler. And so, see, you're all waiting politely. I went right to dessert because that's what I do. Thanks for having me. This is an exciting study for me. I have a personal connection to agriculture, and so it's something I've wanted to do for 15 years. I've been at CMU since 2010. It's funny because I moved here in 2010, and as an economist, I got asked a lot of questions, and there were three primary questions I got asked most of the time. The first question, the biggest one, was, how big is oil and gas? How important is it to our town? Okay, so I did a big study on oil and gas. I've done a lot of research in that field on energy in the region. And then the next thing that came up was outdoor recreation. How big is it? How do we measure it? And so I spent a bunch of time on outdoor rec with some great colleagues at CMU. And I was really excited when Delita and Janie came to me and said, agriculture, because those are the three things I hear the most about, but I don't just like to do studies to do them. I like to wait until there's a need or a demand or some sort of community reason to do it, so this gave me a great excuse. So I'm very excited to be involved in this. So this study has a lot of data, and I'm going to go through some of that data, but I put pictures in it, so it feels like there's less data. Okay. So it's a three-part study. There's the economic impact of agriculture. So it's technically economic contribution, but we don't need to nerd out on economic terms. So I'm going to go through that and show you where it fits in terms of jobs and GDP and labor income. And then we did a survey of Western Slope agricultural producers, because we know in ag there's a lot of problems. We have problems with drought. We have problems with wolves. We have problems with succession planning. We have an aging ag population. We have expensive land. We have changing technology. There's a lot of things going on with ag right now. And this kind of hits close to home for me because I have I grew up, how do I put this? No personal stories in the newspaper media, okay? Just, I'm going to politely ask. So, my cousin has a cattle ranch in central Utah that I grew up by and spent a lot of time at. And that's kind of why this is kind of personal to me, because I've wanted to dig in on something like this. And to see the crazy amount of changes that he's made, because his father died, and Jim's my age, and his dad passed a couple years ago, so he's running the farm. And it's been in the family for 150 years. And to see the technological innovations that he's brought to the farm in the last 4 to 5 years to keep it going is incredible. He's got this hydroponic station because there's tons of drought in central Utah. It just grows stuff and cuts, and he doesn't care if there's no water anymore. He's always got stuff for his cows. He's got 4 or 5 different outlets. He's got sub-businesses of his primary ag business, which is something we asked a lot in here. And so he started a fencing, but he had to put up all this fencing to increase his cattle herds. And he thought, well, to keep the ranch going, how about I just start a fencing company? Because I have all the fencing equipment now. So now he employs a bunch of people in a fencing company. And it's incredible to see what he's done with the family land. And that was kind of going through my mind as I did this study. But the third part of this is agricultural census data. Because one thing as an economist is people always ask me, what's going on in ag? And I say, I don't know, because there's data every 5 years on ag, okay? You get that agricultural census that the census does. There's not another data point. Well, they track jobs technically, so ag has its own line in GDP and jobs. But that's it. And so this part of the study, this is the really data-intensive part, and I just kind of did some bullet points because I didn't want to throw dozens and dozens of tables at you, but there are dozens and dozens of tables in there if you want to look at them. Is going to cover all the way back to 2002 the time series trends in agriculture, livestock trends, crop sales, dollar value, total sales. We've got demographic shifts. So I'm going to show you some of this, and I hope that this serves as a really great resource. I hope that this shows the impact and the place that ag has in our community. So let's go through this stuff. So this is the study area, and that is not as colorful as it is on the sheet, is it? That always gets me nervous if the colors are going to show up. So there's this thing with PowerPoint that sometimes if it's on a computer, that doesn't have the same settings as your PowerPoint, then it doesn't look as awesome. And that's the case with this graph. But in here, it looks awesome. So, but anyways, Rio Blanco, Garfield, Mesa, Delta, and Montrose are the counties that we looked at in this study. So let's get right to the first part, which is the economic impact of agriculture. So let me explain economic impact. You guys all do, it's funny because, you know, I have this dream, I want a hobby farm really bad, okay? So I'm jealous of like most of the people in this room. You gotta do this for a living. I'm jealous of my cousin. So stick with me because you have more interesting things to do than learn about the difference between direct, indirect, and induced effect. But let me just teach you this. So direct effect is going to be the direct employment from the farm. Okay? So in those 5 counties, ag is employing 8,450 people with 72 million in labor income, 215 million in regional GDP, and I'll put that in context in a few minutes, and 587 million in output. So let me explain some of this stuff. So the direct effect is the direct employment, the people you're hiring at your ranch, at your farm, at your business. Indirect effect you can think of as supply chain effects. So if you are buying inputs into your business, maybe you're buying irrigation pipe, maybe you're buying seed, maybe you're buying something that goes into the final output of your agricultural product. That's going to show up as local indirect effects. So a lot of times when you buy some of the stuff, it comes from outside of the county, but in ag, there's pretty reasonable indirect effects. So we see 364 people employed from indirect effects, 20 million in labor income, 35 million in GDP, and 81 million in output. Indirect effects is when the direct effect and the indirect effect, these two groups of employment, so this 8,800, when they get paid, they go do stuff with their money, hopefully, because there's no point in just making all of this money and then dying. You know, you should be doing something. You should have fun. So, so the induced effect is when these people get paid, they go out to dinner, okay? Or they go see a movie. Or they go to Target and they think, you know what? It's time to upgrade our old crappy TV. We're going to buy a nice TV and watch some Netflix or something. So that's the induced effect. And the spending from these people creates 308 jobs by itself. So the total effect of agriculture is 9,123 people. I have this a little bit later, but that equates to 5% of jobs in the Western Slope, which is a good number. I have it in context in the paper, and I have a little bit more on that here. So this is probably more detail than we need, but GDP is how we measure growth. Okay, so we hear about, oh, the economy is growing at 5%. We're talking about GDP. Output is a different measure of GDP. So GDP is going to be like, let's say you had a car, okay? The car sells for $15,000, but there was $5,000 worth of steel, $5,000 worth of rubber, $2,000 worth of plastic that went into that car. The steel company feels like they made $5,000, but the car company feels like they made $15,000. And so GDP only counts the final sale price. So $15,000 would be the GDP. Output is going to be the 5,000 plus the 5,000 plus the 2,000 plus the 15,000. So it's total sales. Okay? So this is how you feel it. So the output number is actually pretty large compared to the GDP number. Based on other studies I've done. So let me give you a little context. Here's the county economic characteristics. So there's 187,000 jobs in the 5-county area, and ag is 9,123 of them. Okay? So that equates to around 5%, which is what I told you before. In terms of jobs, so beef and cattle ranching, driving most of the employment in ag. Support activities for agriculture and forestry is number 2. All other crop farming, number 3. Fruit farming, number 4. And you can see down here, so this is the direct employment, but I told you that you got supply chain effects. So look down here. Truck transportation is the biggest non-ag beneficiary in terms of industry, employing 44 people because of ag. Other real estate, wholesale, other non-durable goods, and merchant wholesalers. Full-service restaurants, and couriers and messengers. So those are the top supply chain effects from ag. Total tax impact, local, let's go state. State impact is about 10 million. Federal impact 33 million, around 34 million. Total impact $54 million in terms of state. So a lot of detail. You know, you got sub-county general, sub-county special districts. We don't need to break all that down for the presentation. But it's there if you ever want to pull it up. You want to show what the tax impact of every industry is, it's in there. Okay, so here is the employment breakdown by county. So Mesa County has the most, 3,220 jobs. Now this is the direct employment, then remember total is direct, indirect, and induced, right? You got the supply chain and the multiplier effects. Okay, so let's look at total jobs. Mesa County, 3,500. Montrose, close to 2,000. Delta, close to 2,000. Garfield, 1,000. Rio Blanco, 452. And here's the percentage of total impact. So 38% of ag jobs in the 5-county area are in Mesa County, 21 and 23 for Montrose and Delta, and then 11 for Garfield and 4 for Rio Blanco. Poor Rio Blanco, just always smaller than everybody else, but making a big impact on ag. So, all right, so just for Mesa County, here's the total impact. We can kind of skip past this. I think you kind of get the idea. 3,500 jobs, 36 million in labor income, close to 100 million in regional GDP right there. Those are the numbers I'm looking for. And then for Mesa County, the top employment is 1,400 in beef cattle ranching, farming, including feedlots and dual purpose ranching and farming. So you got, this is the big part. All of the crop farming, 428, fruit farming, 406, support activities, 361, and animal production, 150. Okay, don't worry. There's even more data. Did you guys bring alcohol to this event? Because I feel like that would have been a good idea.
Next time.
Next time, okay. That's what, we're replacing the cobbler for the next 2 presentations with whiskey, okay? And every time I say economic contribution, you have to take a shot. See, why didn't we think about this before? All right, Western Slope summary. My job is interesting, but it's also kind of boring, and so I have to keep it interesting. All right, so here's county direct economic impact and total economic impact just compared. So as what I want you to look at is this bottom line, okay? So here's the 5% of jobs I was telling you. So we got ag in Western Colorado is accounting for about 5% of jobs, 1% of labor income, and 1.65% of regional GDP. So this is the important line right here. So, all right, so that's the economic impact in the report. I put it in context. I think there are 2 or 3 industries that have about 5% of jobs, and I mentioned them, and I have to open the report to remember. But you know, as I was coming up with this PowerPoint, I thought about all the work I've done on outdoor recreation. One of the arguments with outdoor recreation is there's all these intangible impacts. You know, I have several publications that show, oh, you know, if you're close to trails, your house value's higher, or oh, you know, tons of people relocated here just because of the public lands. You know, that was a big study done. But when you're looking at public lands, you're thinking about view sheds. Okay, you're not just thinking about hiking. You're thinking about view sheds. You're thinking about open space. You're thinking about not having dense condos like in Denver next to your house. You're thinking of a particular lifestyle in a semi-rural area. Some areas around here are very rural. You know, Grand Junction's not super rural. It depends where you live. But in the ag spots, you know, it's going to be mostly rural. I think the point I'm making here is I think ag has a lot of these same intangible impacts. When people move here and choose to move here, the ag industry, you think about Palisade, you know, that a lot of that town is just really awesome agritourism. You know, you go through and it's part of the experience, and you get to see these peach farms, and you know, you drive through Garfield County, you see these huge cattle ranches. You know, you drive up in the mountains, you see all this stuff. It's part of the landscape. It's part of the intangible benefit of living here. It's hard to put a value add on it, just like with outdoor recreation view sheds, but I think that it can be done in a similar way. Now, we didn't do it for this study. It's kind of a different approach. It's not typical economic impact, but I at least wanted to bring it up. View open space leads to that Western Colorado feel. Agricultural landscape, there's a lot of research that shows that ag landscapes increase quality of life, which helps attract and retain business and workforce. And I think this is true. I think if you took ag out of the economy, not only would those numbers that I just show you go away, but I think that a lot of other things would go away because it's part of the charm. It's part of the attraction of the region. And so I wanted to make that point because I live in this world of hard data, but sometimes you can't quantify the impact that everything has. And I think ag is one of those things, kind of like outdoor recreation and outdoor viewscapes. Okay, so that's section 1. You only got 2 more sections of, these have graphs, but they're not showing the right color, but that's okay. What was that? There are pictures. I saved the pictures for the end because I thought you'd be asleep. And I just pulled them off the web, so someone's going to sue me or something, probably. I don't know, so we'll find out. But so ag survey responses. So what type of business do you operate? Now, first of all, we sent this out to about 100 people. We ended up with around 35 to 40 responses. We would like to redo this survey. So next time this email comes to you, and we have all of your email addresses, okay? Now I have all of it. You need to respond to the survey. We're going to do a new and improved version of this survey where, with learning what we've learned going through this report and through these presentations, we're going to try and get a bit more data with a larger sample, okay? So, but from what we have, livestock production was 42% of respondents, crop production 37%, agribusiness, which would be equipment supply, etc., is 5.71%, support services 2.86%, and other 11.43%. How many years have we operated? The vast majority of people have operated more than 20 years. So these are not new people commenting on ag in this survey. These are people who've been here for more than 20 years. And that makes sense. I mean, generally speaking, there's not a lot of turnover in these big ag producers. It's passed on. That's what's happened in my family. It's been 150 years that that same land is passed down to the oldest son. Every new generation goes to the new person. Not even a choice for the oldest son. Okay, I grew up with my cousin. I'm like, what you gonna do when you grow up? He's like, you know what I'm gonna do, Nate. I'm gonna run the ranch. And his son is, the father who died was Jim. The son is Jim Jr. And then they named the 13-year-old. He's my son's age, Jim. So they call him Trace. Third Jim. And he's driving, we have a house down adjacent to the ranch. So it's, we inherited land there too, 4 or 5 acres adjacent to, all the land that he kept, or that he has for the ranch. And, Trace will drive by on his motorbike. I'm like, yeah, that kid, he's running the ranch. So that's what he gets to do when he grows up. Because who else is going to do it? He's not going to be able to sell that business. The land's worth too much money. It's too close to Salt Lake. So, anyways. So I thought about that a lot when I was going through this survey. And I want to point out some of those things that I've learned from him in the survey. So income level. This is the percentage of income that ag brings to the household. So 76 to 100% was 44%. Less than 25% was 26%. 26 to 50% was 11%, and 51 to 75 was 8.8%. So a reasonable distribution, but definitely tilted towards this is my main business. County location, most of the people were in Mesa County, but we've got a good spread. It's about even with the population of ag, honestly, so it's a good distribution. All right, and then last kind of demographic, what's your gross annual sales range? 46% of respondents were less than 100,000, and 2.22% were above 5 million, and then we had a little bit in between. So you start to get up here, it's harder to get to this region right here. That's a big ranch or big farm. But that's the kind of the demographics. All right, business profitability. How profitable has your business been? Or over the next 5 years, what do you anticipate for profitability in your ag business? There's actually some optimism from ag in this survey. Yeah, So more profitable is 40.63%, about the same as 43%, and less profitable is 15.6%. Now, let's see, we did this after tariffs. Okay, I'm just making sure. So that should have the, the big political events in the survey data. What are the largest expenses affecting your profitability? Labor at 30.43%, tied with equipment and maintenance. So those are the two biggest expenses affecting profitability. Fertilizer inputs, 20.29%, and then regulatory compliance, 18.84%. A lot of comments about regulatory issues. So I have all the open-ended comments in the report, so anybody can read the answer. I just cleaned them up a tiny bit because some people type really poorly, but it's the same. So yeah, see? All right. Have you diversified your income streams? I was mentioning this with my cousin earlier. Like, Jim, why are you, why are you selling hogs now? Well, got to get into different income streams. He's selling he used to just sell wholesale, and now there's a couple little stores that carry, their hamburger, and he's even got a little vegetable business that they're selling some of that. He's got the fencing business. I'm like, why are you doing all this stuff? He's like, this is how I keep the farm afloat, Nate. I got all the side businesses to support the farm. And so that's just how it is. Have you diversified your income streams? Well, big game hunting, so those are probably some really big acreage owners. Crop production, different meat and byproduct sales. I'm working on several different farms now, but when I was in charge of a market farm, I was adding tours and winter crops to the list of income streams. A lot of cool open-ended questions. I really appreciate you guys if you answered the survey doing this. Off-farm income, anyways. So you can read through that in the report. But have you diversified your income streams? This goes with this. So this is the question asked, and then this is the open-ended. So 57% said yes. I think with a lot of the risks we have with weather and with regulation, it seems pretty important to me for diversification. One thing we're going to see in the census data is, especially in things like cattle, there's a lot of volatility. And whereas in the crop production and sales, we surprisingly see less volatility. And so thinking about that volatility, I think, is really important, and maybe some of this data helps some of the big producers think about it. What are the biggest barriers to adopting new technology? Cost. 43%, training and knowledge, 19%, infrastructure, 19%, time to implement, 11%, and I don't plan to adopt new technology. Those are my people right there, okay? So these are the people that I want to hang out with, and yeah. Okay, succession plans. This is, I think, Janie, do you think this is the biggest issue in ag right now? It's one of the biggest issues. There's a lot of issues.
It's one that's keeping me awake.
It's one that's keeping it's keeping Janie awake, so it's going to keep all of us awake. Okay, so do you anticipate your business being passed down to the next generation? So it's kind of split. 52% said yes. So you have to do it like my family. You don't give the child a choice. You don't let them see the outside world. There is no outside world. This is your only world. See, my dad made that mistake with his welding business. He should have just said, Nate, you don't have any other option. This is what you're doing. You're taking over the family business. He's like, Nate, go to college. Think about what you want to do. Mistake. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Then you make choices. Can't have choices with succession. Okay. All right. So 52%, yes. Not sure is 38%. And I think this is, these people need to really address this because it happens fast. And then 8% no. So actually it's less pessimistic than we were thinking when we started this, but we need to interview the not sure people. Are younger generations interested in continuing your business? Again, kind of matches over here. 50% yes, 32% unsure, 17% no. Because what happens if they sell? I mean, if there's enough acreage, no one's going to buy it for the revenue stream. No one's going to buy it for the cash flow. So what's going to happen with the land? Developed, right? Yeah. Support and programs. How would you rate the level of support provided by local or state government for agriculture? pretty mixed. I was expecting mostly poor, and it leaned towards poor. But 30% poor, 24% fair, 24% good, 9% excellent. And then the 4 people that don't want technological change also said none. And again, those are my people. That's how I answer surveys. So have you utilized any state or federal agricultural programs in the last 5 years? A lot of different answers. I don't want to dig into these because, quite frankly, I can't talk about most of them. But they're here if you want to look at it. I just at least wanted to show you, what type of data we have. Incentives and threats. Are there specific policies or incentives that would significantly benefit your operation? A lot of different answers, but wolves showed up several times in these answers. And I think these are the Moffett and Rio Blanco folks. So unless the wolves have made it to this region, which I'm not sure of, someone will have to tell me. I think it's just up north, right? Yeah. So in the report, I summarize these so you don't have to read through, but I think the best way to consume the report is to just kind of read through it. Support for infrastructure, engagement with state policymakers, legislative, CDA. What are the greatest threats to the future of agriculture in your area? Drought. I think everybody knows that. You can see it with cattle. You can see it with a couple other crops that are water sensitive in the ag census data. And we just know from news reports and anecdotal evidence. Labor shortage, let's see. Number 2 is input costs. Labor shortages and land access are number 3. And then my 4 people said other. So.
The neighbors.
Yes. All right, drought. So I think drought's important. Probably you do too if you're in agriculture. Certainly my cousin thought drought was important. So there were a couple of years we have a house/cabin by the ranch. And, we weren't allowed to use the outside water for like 2 years. The drought was so bad. And so he had to solve this problem. There's an underground well, but that gets low. And so he started hydroponic farming. What is it, alfalfa? I can't remember what he's growing, but that's how he feeds his cows. It's this crazy growing station. It's got like 20 layers.
Fodder. It's fodder.
Fodder. Okay, yeah, he's explained it, and I've forgotten, but it was crazy. It grows quick. It's like 2 or 3 weeks, and it's fully grown. And I'll see it from the house. It just auto cuts and pushes out into the big piece of equipment, and they'll just drive it out there and dump it out for the cows. And, boom, drought problem solved. So this is some of the technological innovations that I think are really great, although I still agree with the 4 people, about not adopting technology just because I don't want to. So survey respondents were asked, have you been directly impacted by drought in the past 3 years? 71% said yes, 28% said no. Producers reported a wide range of drought impacts, most centered on reduced forage and hay production, which in turn forced herder flock reductions and increased feed purchases. Many noted higher overhead costs, poor crop quality, shortened grazing seasons, and in some cases, complete water unavailability, with some operations producing only 40% of normal hay yields. So this is instead of giving you another one of these, I just summarized it for you. So this is an open-ended response that I'm summarizing. So interesting data on that. Opportunities for the future of agriculture in Western Colorado. Respondents saw opportunities in expanding farm-to-table experiences, which is very popular right now with the millennial crowd. Agritourism, which seems to be working, and direct sales of high-quality local products such as Palisade peaches, as well as developing niche markets for lamb wool and targeted grazing. I know, these are long paragraphs. Stick with me, okay? This is what I do for a living. I keep people interested in what I'm saying. I make stuff up, I tell stories, I pace, I yell into the microphone. Listen, you guys aren't 18. That's the hard age group, okay? You're here because you want to be. So some stressed using limited water for food crops and building resilient local farming systems, while others were pessimistic due to political and regulatory barriers, climate change, and rising land and input costs. So those are all in the open-ended responses. You can read them yourself. They're going to be at the end of section 1 of the report. Anyways, I've done a lot of studies, and this one had the most data, and it was the hardest for me to come to conclusions because there's so many data points. And so at multiple points in the report, I try and take a stab at concluding on the data. But is what I told Delita and Janie is this is going to be one of those reports that when it's digested, I'm going to hear all sorts of stuff, and we're going to have a version 2 where I'm going to hear what people like you think of the results and probably get even more details that we can get from somewhere else. And so that's kind of, I have my eye on, a version 2 of this in the future where I update a few things. But from the data, 71% of producers have been impacted by drought, 57% have diversified income streams. I don't know, we covered all this, right? Survey results show that yeah, we covered all this. Okay, moving on. So I want to give you a little bit of an example of the census data. I have 9 tables for 5 counties and then the combined counties. So that's 9 times 6 of just pure fun. And that's all in there. But I wanted to give you an example of the total, the 5-county area, and then I kind of gave you 2 or 3 bullet points for the conclusion for the counties. And that's what has the pictures.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, I know, right? I wish I would have put more pictures. I just didn't know where to put them. See, could have put it up there. I don't know. All right, so 5-county area. Here are some of the trends for the region. Land farms by use. So pasture land is the primary land, the use of the land. Cropland is number 2, woodland is number 3, other number 4. Farms by value of sales. Now this is important. So 100,000 plus, 8%. Where are most of the farms in Mesa County? Hobby farms, right? Now that's not bad. They're still doing ag, they're monetizing. You get a lot of those intangible impacts. This is why people live here. And there are a lot of opportunities probably for these people to do better. But it gets smaller as you get to those larger producers, okay? So, and it differs per county. It's kind of an interesting story. Mesa County has more hobby farms is what I'm trying to say. And we kind of know this, so which is okay. I want a hobby farm. I already told you this. All right, farm size and age, 5-county area. Farms by size. So here's the number of acres, and again, you can kind of see that. So 29% is 1 to 9 acres, 40% is 10 to 49. You get down here, 1,000 plus acres, that's 4% of the total farms. And then the age of producer, and this changes a little bit by county, but the trend is the same. And you have an aging population for ag. So, in fact, some counties, this 65 plus is significantly higher. And I want to say Delta's that county, but there's so much data, I'd have to open the report to remember, to be honest with you. So, but it's in the report. I did mention it. So that's the trend. We see an aging population, and then another thing that we see is that the number of farms are increasing, but the land in farms is falling. Which means what? That means they're smaller, so it can be more hobby farms, or it can be larger farms, or selling off a little bit of acreage. Probably a combination of both, right? So, and here's the average size of the farm. You can see that it gets lower from 2002 to 2007. This was the most recent ag census. The next one will be 2027. So make sure you answer it. When it gets to, do they mail it? What do they do with that? They call you? They mail it? Okay. Really important. Why? Because I deal with the data, and I'm important. And so what I need from you is to think of me and fill that out, okay? Okay.
Nate, you
Yeah.
don't know how important what you just said is, because everybody hates doing those. So,
Yeah.
but it's important.
I'm joking, but I'm serious. It is really important. This is the only data we get on ag. And if you don't fill it out, we don't get the data. I don't like to fill stuff out either. That's why I'd put the none on all the questions, like those 4 people, okay? But the ag census is sincerely important for arguing for your business and having accurate data to do stuff like this. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, income and expenses. Again, this a lot of data, so we're just going to look at some fun stuff, look at some trends. And I thought about doing graphs, but as you can see, then I'd have like 18 slides of graphs, and so we just put it on one with the table. Market value of agricultural products sold, and this is in real terms. Everything's adjusted for inflation on here. So you can see that it stayed about constant. It popped up in 2012, but we've seen it fall in 2017 and 2022. We had a couple crops, including cattle, that really lost sales, and I think drought had a lot to do with it. Drought, and there are 2 or 3 things I put in that report. Drought's the one I remember because it's in the other survey. But there were 3 main things that I put in the report why we saw a decline in agriculture from 17 to 22. Government payments went up. This is your post-COVID kind of support business payments, and so that's kind of an anomaly. I'm interested to see what happens. I know during the Trump administration, these were a little bit higher because of the tariffs. I'm curious to see what happens by the 2027 census, what happens with government payments. Farm-related income, creeping forward. Total farm production expenses, kind of staying even, sticking with the market value. And then this bounces around for accounting reasons, but growing larger than it was in 2002. How about that? And then here's the per farm average, just to get an idea of how that goes. So how much time do I have, by the way? I turned my phone off. Oh yeah, we're good. I'll definitely be done. So, okay. So you can see that the market value per farm has gone down, but that doesn't mean that, that has to do with this previous graph right here, right? So it's not necessarily an alarm bell. It's just showing that there's a lot more smaller farms that are driving that down. Okay, crop sales. So crops have been more consistent than livestock. You're going to see that here in a minute. But total crops, just, riding constant. So grains, oilseeds, pops around a little bit. Vegetables have grown. You saw vegetables grow a lot in Delta County. I think most of this jump is from Delta. Fruits, tree nuts, berries, this is big for Mesa, obviously, growing pretty consistently. Nursery, greenhouse, floriculture, sod. This would technically be marijuana, would be in this one because it's the greenhouse. Well, it depends how it's grown, I guess, because there's different codes. But anyways, that would be, if it's grown in a greenhouse, it's in here. So that's fallen a little bit. Cultivated Christmas trees, short rotation woody crops, not a lot. There's a Christmas tree farm in Montrose, and they must not have answered their survey. And that's what happens when you don't answer the ag survey. So I want to say there's a couple others too. But that's, it's NA because nobody answers. So other crops and hay. Increased, but in some counties it actually decreased because of drought. So the 5-county area fits the general story, but then each county kind of has a unique story. I'll try and point that out in a minute. So livestock sales, again, the 5-county area combined. So total livestock, you can see it more volatile than crop sales. So let me go back. See, it just kind of stays even. But then look at livestock. We got 196, 180, have 239, 231, then we're down. And a lot of this had to do with cattle. Although we saw an uptick in sheep. I'm trying to remember what county that was in. Again, there's too many data points. I'd have to open the report. We saw a decline in cattle and an uptick in sheep. It's in the report. But cattle and calves saw a big decline. Most of the data points to drought for that. Milk from cows pops around. These people aren't answering their survey. I know there's people who milk cows all the time. So hogs and pigs, pretty small for this region. Sheep, goats, this has increased in one county and it's fallen in another. So overall it's held steady, but in a couple counties this is the story. Horses, ponies, mules, burros, donkeys, pretty low. Aquaculture, sounds awesome, whatever that is, but small. And then other animals and animal products, again, pretty small and riding pretty steady. So that's the trends in livestock sales. Let me show you livestock inventory and then I'll show you some pictures. So cattle and calves inventory, look, 200,000 to 134. That's a huge drop, and that's why you're seeing this fall so much. So you saw the inventory fall. Cattle and calves sold went down. Hogs and pigs inventory, steady. Hogs and pigs sold, steady. Sheep and lambs inventory popped up. Again, that's a county level story. And then broilers and other meat type chickens sold. Pretty small, but you also saw that pop up since 2017. And I can't remember which county that's in, but one county has a new production that data point popped up. All right, so this is what's in the report. You know, it's maybe not the funnest read, but a crazy resource for data. You know, if you need to pull this data, you can pull up one of these charts for any of these 5 counties, the 5 counties combined, and you'll have this data. So I tried to put this in some simplified conclusions. And honestly, I think if you're in ag, you're going to read this report, and you might have a different conclusion. Well, you probably won't disagree with my conclusions, but you might have an additional conclusion. And I would love to hear that, sincerely. I'd love it if you'd email it to me. And I think my email's on the acknowledgments section. If you want to email me with your comments, I have a feeling there's going to be a version 2 update of this report. And, you know, if I think it fits the data and is correct based on, you know, the research and, you know, I think there's a chance that, you know, we kind of update this for any potential missing conclusions. But here's what I have so far. Well, there's a lot more than this, but I picked out my favorite. So livestock drives most sales, but is more volatile and drought sensitive, while specialty crops provide more stability where irrigation and market access support them. The practical implication is that protecting water-dependent production, supporting farm transition, and improving margins through added and market access strategies, I should have added technology to that, will shape the region's agricultural future. So that's conclusion 1. Conclusion 2, since 2002, the number of farms has grown in most counties, but local farmland has dropped by 50 to 30% in those 3 counties, showing a shift towards smaller scale operations. We talked about that. I hope to be one of those small scale operations one of these days with my cool little hobby farm. And you're going to laugh at me because most of you are probably real ranchers or real farmers. But in my mind, I will be a real rancher and farmer on my hobby farm. And you won't be able to tell me otherwise. And I'll name all the little animals. No. That's what my little girl would do, I guarantee it. Anyways, all right. Since 2002, did that one. Okay, across the region, 35 to 44% of producers are over the age of 65, while less than 8% are under 35, raising long-term agricultural succession concerns. This is a big issue. In all counties, over 80% of farms generate less than $100,000 annually, with many making under $2,500, and that's the hobby farm community, especially in Mesa County. Cattle remain the dominant livestock sector, but have seen inventory and sales declines since 2017 in most counties. Despite declines in cattle across the region, sheep inventory increased in Montrose and Rio Blanco. See, I have to write it down, I can't remember. But we saw big sheep increases in Montrose and Rio Blanco. And I thought Garfield had a big sheep. I had a student who had a huge thing up there, and I can't remember his name. But anyways. All right, cattle, did I say that one? Yes. Okay, Mesa and Delta counties remain strong in fruit, tree, nut, and berry production. Delta leads in vegetable production growth, a lot of growth in vegetable production in Delta, while nursery and greenhouse sales have generally declined. Okay, so that's kind of the conclusion of the 5-county area. Let me give you just some short conclusions, the highlights of the county level story, okay? And we have pictures. So farm counts rise over time in Mesa County, but the land base shrinks. So that's a similar trend to the total, which pulls the average farm size down. Mesa has the highest share of farms under 2,500. We covered that. Only a small share of farms report 100,000 or more in sales, so farm counts overstate commercial capacity. We mentioned that. Mesa's comparative advantage is on the crop side, especially fruits, tree nuts, and berries. I think that's obvious, and we mentioned that. Mesa is more crop anchored than the grazing counties, which helps stabilize output when livestock cycles weaken. You know, it's funny. I hear that diversified from business cycles more and more from Mesa County, and it's actually true on the ag side. So yes.
5 minutes.
Oh, 5, okay. Thought you had a question. Yes, Janie, who knows more about agriculture than me. What's your question? Okay, Delta. Delta shows the strongest crop growth in the region, led by vegetables and fruit categories. The livestock mix shifts after 2017 with cattle inventory down and broiler sales higher by 2022. That's the county that has the broiler sales. Delta's trend is diversification within agriculture rather than a single dominant industry. So we've seen diversification in Delta. You're seeing just more breadth of agricultural production in Delta. So that's one of my conclusions from Delta. Montrose. The producer base is older than peers, which raises transition risk. So Montrose has a big age succession problem of the 5 counties, the biggest one. Vegetables remain the defining crop category, while the livestock mix shifts with cattle down in 2017 and sheep inventory up. Okay, Montrose, sheep inventory up. And of course, you got a lot of corn production in Montrose. Garfield is anchored in pasture and hay with higher average farm size, but many low sales farms. Garfield's super concentrated. So the biggest, let's see, did I put that here? Well, anyways, I'll put a pretend bullet point. Garfield's there's a couple really big producers in Garfield. The biggest shift is the 2017 to 2022 drop in total sales and cattle metrics, which increases sensitivity to drought and cattle cycles. So Garfield got hit with that cattle cycle. I think Garfield's a little bit more sensitive to drought. The county totals are more volatile because a smaller number of larger operations drive a large share of output. Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make. It's concentrated. See, I should just rewrite that. It sounds so fancy. Okay, Rio Blanco. Rio Blanco stands apart on land base and ranch scale with land in farms higher than in 2002 and large average farm size. During COVID, lots of people bought mid-size ranches in Moffat and Rio Blanco County. Anyways, it has the highest share of farms above 100,000 in sales, indicating stronger commercial concentration, and crop sales growth is concentrated in hay and other crops, which fits a grazing and forage-oriented production base. And that's a fun-looking cow. So there's that. Okay, I think that's it. I have the Mesa County data, but it's in the report, and there's a lot of data, so I think this is good. We'll end with the cute cow. So yeah, any questions? There's a lot in here. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. You can email me at my CMU address. I'm going to be thinking about agriculture for a while longer, so